But perhaps most powerfully, Seneca would completely reframe your relationship with suffering itself. This is where his wisdom becomes truly revolutionary, because most of our anxiety comes from the belief that we shouldn't have to suffer, that life should be comfortable and predictable, that pain is always a sign that something is wrong. Seneca would gently but firmly challenge these assumptions. "Fire tests gold, adversity tests brave souls," he wrote, and he meant this literally. Your anxiety, your struggles, your darkest moments, these are not punishments or signs of weakness, or evidence that you're failing at life. They are the forge in which your character is shaped. They are the weights that build your emotional muscle. They are the storms that teach you how strong your roots really are. Think about metal being forged into a sword. The raw material must be heated, hammered, heated again, hammered again. This process looks violent and destructive from the outside. But it's not punishment. It's transformation. The metal doesn't become a sword despite the fire and hammering. It becomes a sword because of them. Without that process, it remains weak and brittle, unable to serve its purpose. You are being forged. In the same way, every challenge you face, every moment of anxiety, if you walked into Seneca's study in ancient Rome, trembling with the weight of modern anxiety, what would he tell you? Not platitudes about positive thinking or empty reassurances that everything will be fine. He would look at you with the eyes of someone who understood suffering intimately and give you the most practical, powerful advice ever spoken about conquering the storms in your mind. Seneca wasn't just a philosopher writing pretty words. He was a man who lived through political chaos, personal loss, and the constant threat of death under Emperor Nero's reign. He knew what it meant to wake up with your heart racing, to feel the crushing weight of uncertainty, and to wonder if you had the strength to face another day. And from that experience, he developed insights about anxiety that are more relevant today than they were 2,000 years ago. Imagine sitting in that marble study, scrolls scattered across wooden tables, the scent of burning oil from flickering, lamps filling the air. Outside, the sounds of Rome echo through narrow streets, but inside, there's a profound stillness. This is where one of history's greatest minds wrestled with the same demons that haunt you today. Fear of the future, worry about things beyond control, the exhausting mental loops that keep you awake at night. Seneca didn't just write about these struggles from a place of detached academic interest. He lived them. He felt the cold sweat of political persecution, the grief of losing loved ones, the terror of knowing that any day could be his last under a mad emperor's rule. If you're finding value in this ancient wisdom for modern struggles, make sure to subscribe to Stoic Forge and hit the bell icon so you never miss content that could change how you face life's challenges. We dive deep into timeless philosophy that actually works in the real world, not just in theory. Picture this conversation. You sit across from Seneca, your mind racing with worry about the future, about things you cannot control, about scenarios that may never happen. Your hands tremble slightly as you speak. Your voice catches when you describe the weight that sits on your chest every morning. You tell him about your sleepless nights, your racing thoughts, your fear of making the wrong decisions. You describe how anxiety feels like drowning in air, how it makes you feel weak and broken, how it convinces you that you're the only one who can't handle life's basic challenges. Seneca leans forward, his weathered face reflecting understanding, not judgment. And here's what he would say. First, he would tell you that most of your suffering exists only in your imagination. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, he wrote in his letters to Lucilius. But he wouldn't say this dismissively. He would explain it with the compassion of someone who has walked this path. Think about your anxiety right now. How much of it is based on what's actually happening versus what might happen? How much energy are you spending fighting battles that exist only in your head? He would help you see that your mind has become a theater where you're both the audience. and the actor in endless tragic performances. You rehearse conversations that may never happen. You imagine failures that haven't occurred. You live through rejections, losses, and disasters in vivid detail over and over again. Seneca would make you understand that anxiety is largely the mind's desperate attempt to control an uncertain future by rehearsing every possible disaster. But here's the truth he discovered through his own suffering. The future you're anxious about rarely unfolds the way you imagine it will. And even if it does, you're living through that pain twice, once in your imagination and once in reality. That's not wisdom, that's self-torture. He would tell you about his own sleepless nights during Nero's reign, when every dawn could bring a death sentence, when political winds could shift in hours and destroy everything he had built. Yet he learned that the anticipation of suffering was always worse than the suffering itself. It is likely that some troubles will befall us, he would say, but it is not a present fact. How often has the unexpected happened? How often has the expected never come to pass? Next, Seneca would teach you the most liberating concept in all of philosophy, the dichotomy of control. But he wouldn't just explain it intellectually. He would make you feel it in your bones. He would take a piece of papyrus and draw a line. Down the middle, on one side, he would write everything that's causing your anxiety. Your job security, your relationships, your health, what others think of you, the economy, world events, your children's futures, whether you'll be successful, whether you'll be alone, whether you'll have enough money, whether you'll make the right choices. Then he would look at each item carefully and move most of them to the other side of the line. Because here's what he discovered through decades of philosophical practice and real-world suffering. Almost everything that causes you anxiety falls into the category of things you cannot control. You cannot control the economy, other people's opinions, natural disasters, your genetic predispositions, the past, or even your own mortality. You cannot control whether others will love you, whether your efforts will be rewarded, whether tragedy will strike, or whether your plans will succeed. But on the left side of that line, he would show you what remains. The things you can actually control. Your thoughts, your actions, your responses, your character, your effort, your integrity, your kindness, your preparation, your attitude, how you spend your time, what you focus on, how you treat others, and most importantly, how you choose to interpret and respond to everything that happens to you. The moment you truly grasp this distinction, anxiety begins to lose its grip on you, because you stop wasting energy on battles you cannot win and start focusing on the ones you can. But Seneca would warn you that this isn't just an intellectual exercise, it requires constant practice. Your mind will resist this wisdom because it's been trained to believe that worrying about uncontrollable things somehow helps prevent them. It doesn't. Worry never prevented a single disaster, but it has prevented millions of people from living fully. He would share his personal practice with you. Every morning he would review what was within his control for that day and commit to focusing only on those things. Every evening, he would examine whether he had lived up to that commitment. When he caught his mind drifting into worry about uncontrollable events, he would gently redirect it back to what he could actually influence. This wasn't suppression of thoughts. It was training the mind like an athlete trains the body, with repetition, discipline, and patience. Seneca would then address your relationship with fear directly, but not in the way most people do. He wouldn't tell you to eliminate fear or pretend it doesn't exist. Instead, he would help you understand fear as information, as a natural human response that can actually serve you when properly understood. He would tell you that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in the presence of it. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he wrote, reminding you that what you fear as an ending might actually be the start of something better. But he would go deeper than simple platitudes. He would challenge you to examine your fears with the precision of a surgeon. What exactly are you afraid of? Write it down. Be specific. Are you afraid of failure? What kind of failure? Professional, personal, financial? Are you afraid of rejection? By whom? In what context? Are you afraid of loss? What specifically might you lose? Are you afraid of judgment? Whose judgment matters to you and why? He would then ask the crucial question that changes everything. What's the worst that could actually happen? Not the catastrophic scenarios your anxious mind creates, but the realistic worst case. Let's say you fail at that project you're worried about. What would actually happen? You might be embarrassed. You might have to start over. You might disappoint some people. But would you die? Would you be homeless? Would everyone you care about abandon you? Usually the honest answer is no. And even if some of those things did happen, Seneca would ask the follow-up question that reveals your true strength. Could you survive it? Could you rebuild? Could you learn from it? Have you survived difficult things before? The answer is almost always yes, because you're still here. You've faced uncertainty before and found a way through. You've experienced disappointment and recovered. You've made mistakes and grown from them. Seneca would share his own experience of losing everything. He was exiled from Rome for 8 years, stripped of his wealth, his position, his reputation. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. But he later wrote that those years of exile taught him more about himself and life than all his previous successes combined. Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions, he observed, but a wise man is prepared for either. He would help you see that much of what you fear is actually your ego's attachment to specific outcomes rather than genuine threats to your well-being. You're not afraid of public speaking because it will physically harm you. You're afraid of looking foolish. You're not afraid of starting a business because it's inherently dangerous. You're afraid of failing and having others judge you for it. Once you separate real dangers from ego threats, most of your fears lose their power over you. But Seneca wouldn't stop at mental exercises. He would give you practical tools for training your mind like a muscle, because philosophy without practice is just intellectual entertainment. He would introduce you to one of his most powerful techniques, the practice of negative visualization, though he would explain it carefully because it's often misunderstood. This isn't about being pessimistic or inviting disaster. It's about building emotional resilience and genuine gratitude. Here's how it works. Spend a few minutes each day imagining losing what you cherish most, not in a morbid way, but as a mental exercise in preparation and appreciation. Imagine your loved ones are no longer in your life. How would you feel? What would you miss most about them? How would you want to have treated them if you knew time was limited? This exercise doesn't invite tragedy. It reveals how precious your current blessings are and motivates you to treat them with the reverence they deserve. Imagine losing your health, your home, your job, your reputation. Not to torture yourself, but to discover something profound. You would survive. You would adapt. You would find new sources of meaning and joy. Humans are remarkably resilient, but we forget this truth when we're caught up in protecting what we have. Negative visualization reminds you that while losing things would be difficult, it wouldn't destroy you. And that knowledge is incredibly liberating. Seneca practiced this daily. He would imagine losing his wealth, his position, even his life. Not because he was depressed or morbid, but because this practice made him grateful for what he had and fearless about what he might lose. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" This practice strips anxiety of its power because you've already mentally rehearsed how you would handle loss and discovered that you're stronger than you think. It also reveals how much of your anxiety comes from attachment to things that, while pleasant, are not essential for your well-being or happiness. When you know you can be content with less, the fear of losing more becomes manageable. But negative Visualization serves another crucial purpose. It shows you that most of what you're anxious about losing are external things, possessions, status, others' opinions, while your core self, your character, your capacity for growth and love, these things cannot be taken from you unless you allow it. This is where Seneca would introduce you to the concept of the inner citadel, the unassailable fortress of your mind and character that remains untouchable no matter what external storms may rage. Seneca would also tell you to stop trying to predict and control every outcome, but he would explain why this is so difficult for the anxious mind. Your brain evolved to be a prediction machine, constantly scanning for threats and trying to prepare for them. This served your ancestors well when threats were immediate and physical. If you heard a rustling in the bushes, it was better to assume it was a predator and be wrong than to assume it was harmless and be wrong. But in modern life, this same mechanism creates suffering, because most of the threats your brain perceives are abstract, distant, or unlikely. You hear about economic uncertainty, and your brain treats it like an immediate physical danger. You imagine social rejection, and your nervous system responds as if you're being attacked. You think about future problems, and your body floods with stress hormones as if those problems were happening right now. The mind that is anxious about future misfortunes is miserable, Seneca observed, and he was describing this exact phenomenon. Instead of living in constant preparation for disaster, he would teach you to live fully in the present moment while taking reasonable precautions for the future. This doesn't mean being reckless or unprepared. It means accepting that uncertainty is the natural state of existence and that trying to eliminate all risk only creates more suffering. He would share his own struggles with this tendency. Even as a wise philosopher, he caught his mind spinning elaborate scenarios about political threats, financial losses, and personal failures. The difference was that he learned to recognize these mental patterns and redirect his attention to what he could actually influence in the present moment. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future, he wrote, but he had to work daily to embody this wisdom. Seneca would teach you to distinguish between productive planning and anxious rumination. Planning involves taking concrete actions based on available information. You research before making decisions, you save money for emergencies, you develop skills to increase your options. But rumination is different. It's the endless mental rehearsal of problems without taking any action to solve them. It's thinking about the same worries over and over without moving closer to a solution. When you catch yourself ruminating, Seneca would teach you to ask 3 questions. Is this something I can take action on right now? If yes, take the action. If no, move to the second question. Is this something I can influence through preparation or skill building? If yes, make a plan and take the first step. If no, ask the third question. Is continued thinking about this serving any purpose other than making me miserable? If no, consciously redirect your attention to something you can control. Here's where Seneca would get even more practical, because he understood that philosophy must be lived, not just contemplated. He would tell you to examine your daily habits with the thoroughness of a physician diagnosing an illness, because anxiety often feeds on neglect of the basics. Your mind and body are not separate entities. They're interconnected systems, and when one suffers, the other follows. Are you getting enough sleep? Not just hours in bed, but quality sleep that allows your nervous system to recover from daily stress. Seneca maintained strict sleep habits, going to bed and waking at consistent times, because he knew that a tired mind is vulnerable to every anxious thought. Sleep deprivation makes everything feel more threatening, more urgent, more catastrophic than it actually is. Are you moving your body regularly? Physical exercise isn't just about health and appearance. It's about burning off the stress hormones that anxiety produces. When you're anxious, your body prepares for physical action, flooding you with adrenaline and cortisol. If you don't give that energy an outlet through movement, It turns inward and amplifies your mental distress. Seneca walked daily, not just for physical health, but for mental clarity. Are you feeding your mind with wisdom or poison? What do you consume first thing in the morning? The news, social media, political arguments. These inputs set the tone for your entire day. If you start each morning flooding your mind with problems you cannot solve, threats you cannot control, and conflicts you cannot resolve, you're programming yourself for anxiety. Seneca began each day with philosophical reflection, setting his intentions and reminding himself of what truly mattered. Are you surrounding yourself with people who build you up or tear you down? Anxiety is often contagious. If you spend time with people who constantly worry, complain, and catastrophize, their mental state will influence yours. Seneca chose his companions carefully, seeking those who challenged him to be better rather than those who confirmed his worst fears. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, and sometimes ending relationships that drain your peace is necessary for your mental health. But Seneca would also address the habits of thought that perpetuate anxiety. Do you have a practice of gratitude, or do you focus primarily on what's wrong or missing in your life? The anxious mind is naturally biased toward problems and threats. Without conscious effort to notice what's going well, you'll live in a constant state of deficit thinking. Seneca kept a gratitude journal, not because he was naturally optimistic, but because gratitude is a skill that must be practiced. Do you have boundaries around your mental energy, or do you allow every worry to take up residence in your mind? Seneca treated his attention like a precious resource that must be guarded. He didn't allow himself to dwell on problems he couldn't solve or engage with every negative thought that arose. He practiced what we might today call mental hygiene, consciously choosing what deserved his mental energy and what could be dismissed. Seneca would also address your relationship with discomfort directly, because this is where many people get trapped in cycles of anxiety. He would tell you that much of your anxiety comes from trying to avoid all pain and difficulty. But this approach is not only impossible, it's counterproductive because it makes you weaker over time. Every time you avoid a challenging situation, because it makes you anxious, you reinforce the message that you're not capable of handling difficulty. This creates more anxiety, not less. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, Seneca would remind you. Growth requires discomfort. Strength comes from facing challenges, not avoiding them. But he wouldn't advocate for seeking unnecessary hardship. Instead, he would teach you to distinguish between productive discomfort that builds character and pointless suffering that serves no purpose. Think about physical exercise. The discomfort you feel when lifting weights or running isn't pleasant in the moment, but you accept it because you know it's making you stronger. Mental and emotional challenges work the same way. The anxiety you feel when speaking in public, starting a new project, or having a difficult conversation isn't enjoyable, but it's the price of growth. Instead of running from difficult emotions, Seneca would teach you to sit with them and study them like a scientist studies a specimen. What does anxiety actually feel like in your body? Where do you feel it? Your chest? Your stomach? Your throat? What thoughts typically accompany it? What stories does your mind tell when anxiety arises? Often, when you examine anxiety closely, instead of trying to escape it, you discover it's not as overwhelming as it seemed from a distance. Seneca practiced this kind of emotional observation daily. When he felt fear about political persecution, he would notice how it manifested physically. When worry about his family arose, he would examine the thoughts behind the worry. This wasn't self-torture. It was developing emotional intelligence and resilience. You can't manage what you don't understand, and most people understand their anxiety poorly because they're too busy running from it to study it. He would also teach you about the paradox of acceptance. The more you fight your anxious feelings, the stronger they become. The more you try to eliminate anxiety completely, the more anxious you become about being anxious. But when you accept that some anxiety is part of the human experience, when you stop seeing it as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as information to be processed, it loses much of its power over you. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on improving your mental state. It means approaching anxiety with curiosity rather than hostility. Instead of thinking, "I shouldn't feel this way," or "something is wrong with me for feeling anxious," you learn to think, "I notice I'm feeling anxious right now. What is this trying to tell me? What do I need to pay attention to? What action, if any, would be helpful right now?" Most importantly, Seneca would remind you of something that could change your entire relationship with your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This might seem like a simple distinction, but it's one of the most profound realizations you can have. When anxiety floods your mind with worries and fears, you don't have to believe every story it tells you. You don't have to be swept away by every mental storm that arises. Think of your mind like a vast sky, and your thoughts like clouds passing through it. Some clouds are light and wispy, barely noticeable. Others are dark and heavy, threatening. But no matter how dramatic the weather, the sky itself remains unchanged. It doesn't become the storm. It simply allows the storm to pass through it. You are like that sky, vast, spacious, and fundamentally unaffected by the temporary weather patterns of your thoughts. When anxious thoughts arise, instead of getting caught up in their content, you can step back and observe them with detachment. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice my mind is creating worst-case scenarios again. I notice anxiety is trying to convince me that I'm in danger when I'm actually safe. This observer self, this core of your being that remains calm even when your thoughts are chaotic, this is your true strength. Anxiety cannot touch this deeper part of you. Seneca discovered this through years of practice and reflection. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That power begins with recognizing that you are not at the mercy of every thought that passes through your consciousness. You can choose which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass by, like clouds in the sky. This practice requires patience and persistence because your mind has been trained to believe that every thought is important and urgent. Anxious thoughts, in particular, come with a sense of emergency that demands immediate attention. But most thoughts, especially anxious ones, are not nearly as important as they pretend to be. They're often just mental noise, the background chatter of a brain that's evolved to constantly scan for problems. Learning to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them is like learning any other skill. At first it feels awkward and unnatural. Your mind will resist, insisting that you need to pay attention to every worry and fear. But over time, with practice, you develop the ability to watch the drama of your thoughts without being pulled onto the stage. You become the audience, not the actor, in your mind's theatrical performances. Seneca would then teach you about the transformative power of routine and ritual, though not in the rigid, joyless way that many people imagine. He maintained strict, daily practices not because he was naturally disciplined or loved structure, but because he discovered that discipline creates freedom. When you have non-negotiable habits that ground you, morning reflection, evening review, regular exercise, consistent sleep, you create islands of stability in an uncertain world. These practices become your anchor when everything else feels chaotic. His morning routine was simple but profound. Before engaging with the outside world, before checking on political developments or business matters, he would spend time in reflection. He would remind himself of his values, his priorities, and what he could control that day. He would prepare mentally for challenges he might face and commit to responding from wisdom rather than emotion. This wasn't positive thinking or self-hypnosis. It was strategic mental preparation, like a warrior preparing for battle. His evening routine was equally important. Before sleep, he would review the day just past. What had he done well? Where had he acted from virtue and wisdom? Where had he fallen short of his ideals? What had he learned about himself and life? This wasn't self-criticism, but self-awareness. Without honest reflection, we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. With it, we can gradually improve our responses to life's challenges. But Seneca would emphasize that these routines must be personal and sustainable. There's no magic formula that works for everyone. Some people need morning exercise to feel grounded. Others need evening meditation. Some find strength in journaling. Others prefer contemplation. The key is consistency, not perfection. It's better to have a simple practice you maintain every day than an elaborate one you abandon after a week. These rituals serve as circuit breakers for anxiety. When your mind is spinning with worry, returning to a familiar practice can interrupt the mental loop and bring you back to the present moment. The act of engaging in something routine and grounding sends a message to your nervous system that you're safe, that not everything is chaos, that some things remain steady even when life feels uncertain. Seneca also understood the power of morning intention setting and evening reflection in building emotional resilience over time. Each day becomes a learning laboratory where you can experiment with different responses to challenges and observe what works. Instead of being reactive, carried along by whatever emotions arise, you become proactive, consciously choosing how to meet each day's difficulties. But perhaps most powerfully, Seneca would tell you to reframe your relationship with suffering itself. Fire tests gold. Adversity tests brave souls, he wrote. Your anxiety, your struggles, your darkest moments, these are not punishments or signs of weakness. They are the forge in which your character is shaped. Every time you face fear and keep moving forward, every time you feel anxious and choose action anyway, you are building strength that cannot be taken from you. The goal is not to eliminate all anxiety, it's to develop the courage to act despite it. Seneca would remind you that everyone faces uncertainty and fear. The difference between those who thrive and those who merely survive is not the absence of anxiety, but the response to it. You can let it paralyze you, or you can use it as fuel for growth. You can see it as a signal that you're doing something that matters, stepping outside your comfort zone, pursuing goals that challenge you. Finally, Seneca would leave you with this truth. You are more resilient than you know. You have survived every difficult day of your life so far. You have faced uncertainty before and found a way through. You have the strength within you to handle whatever comes next. Not because life will be easy, but because you are capable of being strong. The anxiety you feel is not a sign of your weakness. It's a sign of your humanity and your ability to feel deeply, to care about the future, to want to protect what matters to you. These are not flaws to be eliminated, but qualities to be channeled wisely. So when anxiety tries to convince you that you're not strong enough, remember Seneca's words. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Your anxiety does not define you. Your response to it does. And in that response, you have the power to choose courage over fear, action over paralysis, growth over stagnation. This is not just philosophy. This is the path to a life of genuine strength and unshakable peace. The next time anxiety knocks on your door, don't run from it. Sit with it. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. Then choose your response based on your values, not your fears. Because that's what Seneca would do. That's what anyone who has ever built real strength learns to do. And that's what you can learn to do too. Remember, you are not here to live a life free from all discomfort and uncertainty. You are here to become someone who can face any storm with steady eyes and unshakable resolve. And every moment of anxiety you transform into action is a step toward that person. Every fear you face is a victory. Every day you choose growth over comfort is a day you become more of who you were meant to be. This is your path. This is your power. This is your choice.